just as we kind of start off, I'm going to start with the basics. So what is well-being? Well, it depends on who you ask, right? It's Wellness Week here on campus, and some people would say, what's the difference between wellness and well-being? Well, by some definitions, they're just synonyms for one another. And some people would say they're very different, where some would say wellness is really about physical wellness, and well-being is a broader measure of life evaluation and lots of different elements and things like that. But it kind of depends on the definition. As we define well-being at Gallup, it's a pretty broad definition as well, and then we get more specific from there. But it's all the things that are important to how we think about and experience our lives. So two components there that are important to remember. How do we think about our lives? That's that life evaluation aspect. And then how do we evaluate our lives, which is more, or how do we experience our lives? So the life evaluation, we ask a question, imagine a ladder with steps numbered 0 through 10, where 0 represents the worst possible life, 10 represents the best possible life. On what step would you place yourself today? And then we ask a follow-up question, on what step would you place yourself 5 years from now? So if you're a 7 today, it's very different if you think you'll be a 5 years from now than if you think you'll be a 9 5 years from now. So what's the direction of the trajectory of your well-being, not just the raw number there. The life evaluation is reasonably easy to measure. We can do it in 1 or 2 questions, but it's really hard to change. I mean, how do you move from a 6 to a 7? What are the steps you need to take to do that? So to get to the steps and the change and the intervention, we really look at more of the experienced well-being components. If you're familiar with Dr. Danny Kahneman's research, Kahneman is a psychologist from Princeton who actually won the Nobel in economics about 6 years ago for his work in, actually it's been more than that, it's 2002 I believe, in behavioral economics. He really launched the science of behavioral economics. So if you're familiar with Dan Ariely, Dan Goleman, Dan Kahneman, a bunch of people not named Dan, there's a lot of research that's been done in that whole field of behavioral economics. But it's really about studying those experiences and why do we make decisions the way that we do. So when we think about experienced well-being, we ask questions about yesterday. Positive yesterday is what we're really after. So how many hours did you sleep the night before yesterday, which helps to get at how well rested you were. How many hours of social interaction with a family or friend, with a colleague, and we get into some of the other pieces around positive emotions and negative emotions, and so the absence of negative or the presence of positive emotions help to tap into that more daily experience well-being. So we try to get at both of those pieces. The research that we draw from is really summarized in this book that many of you have copies of or have seen. Tom Rath and Jim Harder, just called Well-Being, the 5 Essential Elements. And those 5 elements, anybody remember what the 5 are, or any of the 5? This is audience participation. Yes? Social, financial, community, career, physical. There they are. So those are the 5, career, social, financial, physical, and community. And on the assessment and in the book and in the programming, we actually touch on each of the elements individually, and then we look at overall well-being, kind of the aggregate. So if you remember back to your reports, if you took the assessment, you would have gotten a score overall on a 1 to 100 scale, and then you also would have gotten a score 1 to 10 in each of the 5 elements. So you can really make sense out of it. So again, it's broader life evaluation, how are things going, but then more specific in each of these elements. The action happens more at the individual element level. If we're focused on my social well-being or on my physical well-being or my financial, although there's a lot of overlap. If you're in a difficult financial situation, it probably creates stress, which is not likely to improve your social well-being. Or if your community well-being is struggling because you don't like the area or the place where you live, or you're not involved or connected to your community, that probably impacts your social well-being or perhaps your career well-being. So they're interconnected elements, but and when you start to think about them one at a time, you can really get at some of the action around it. Just to quickly review, so career well-being is how you occupy your time and do you like what you do each day. Our resident occupational expert in the room, Bernadette Mineo, has been the leader of the team at ATSU, along with Janet and Erlinda and Dr. Sexton at KCOM. She said maybe the term career wasn't perfect, maybe we would think occupation, because it's really how you occupy your time. When we think of career, we think of a job or a series of jobs. But clearly for students who I believe in this room a couple of years ago, there were PA students, and they're not thinking about their career in the moment. They're thinking about their career as something in the future where their education is in the moment. But as we define it and the items really get at, do you like what you do each day? I have a grandmother that turned 100 back in about a month ago, And she still occupies her time and likes what she does each day or not, and would be able to relate to many of the items on this survey as well. So that's career. So social, relationships, and love in your life. And there's two aspects to social well-being. There's a breadth of social relationships that's important, your social network, but there's also a depth. We each need a few to a lot of deep social relationships that are meaningful connections that we have. Someone who we can call if we need advice, or someone who we can go to in a time of need, or we're there for them in that same time. So that tight network, but also the breadth of that network, both are captured in social well-being. The next is financial well-being, and this again has two components to it. It's more about our relationship with money in the present, and does that create stress or anxiety, or does that create satisfaction or joy? And then also long-term, what kind of feelings do I have about long-term financial security? As we talk about well-being with students, particularly financial well-being, I've got a lot of questions that I still don't have perfect answers to about when is it my money? Or when is it my parents' money? Or do I just hit the pause button on financial well-being while I'm in school because the loans are covering it for now, and I'll think about that again 3 to 5 years from now, whatever the case might be. So, and everything in between, right? I mean, there's lots of individual differences there, but that's financial well-being. It's not about how much money you have, although if given the choice, more tends to be better than less, but it's not as dramatic as we might expect. If you have a low income but you manage it well, your likelihood to have high financial well-being is much better than if you have a high income and it stresses you out and you can't make ends meet because you're living paycheck to paycheck to make 3 car payments and 2 house payments and whatever else the case might be. So that's financial. Physical, good health and enough energy to get things done. There's really 3 components on this. It's diet, exercise, and sleep. No big deal there, right? I mean, we kind of know that forever. And the basic advice that we've all received from our parents or our medical providers or spouse, anyone else, there's no huge secrets here. We don't come out and say this is the diet you should do and this is the exercise you should do. But 20 or 30 minutes of physical activity at least, get your heart rate up. And if you do it in the morning, that's even better because it helps you feel better throughout the day. People who exercise to lose weight have some long-term goal about that. That's not wrong. It's usually just not enough. You need to exercise because it's going to make you feel better today. I would have liked to have had a bacon double cheeseburger, and my apologies if anyone has one. But I knew I was going to be standing here and I wanted to be reasonably interesting, so I chose a salad for lunch today because it'll make me feel better this afternoon. Now, it might help me not gain a pound this month too, but I make better choices if I think about it in the moment and that immediate gratification that we're kind of wired as humans to appreciate. So anyway, that's physical. And then the last is community. Again, as we think about students and faculty and staff, this is about engagement and involvement in the area where you live. Now, some people want to quickly build those community relationships with the campus community. Some people never identify with this or Kirksville as home because I'm just kind of passing through. And some people, and again, it's sort of how do you internalize that, particularly as students. And we'll notice a difference here in a moment when we look at your data about the difference in raw score on student community well-being and faculty staff community well-being. So just some reminders there for many of you about the model. This is just a list of a few of the things that we've discovered through much of our research, not just ATSU specific, but our more broad research agenda. Well-being matters, not just because it's a nice thing to study or it's an interesting topic or it'll sell a book really well or something like that, but it has a real meaningful relationship to important outcomes that matter, like are you going to stay in the job that you're in? Are you engaged in that job? How satisfied are you with your life overall? What's the likelihood of disease burden? The amount of disease burden that you have in your future, a lot of that's based on your well-being today, obviously. And again, we know this, but it's nice to be able to put math to that. Also, things like altruism or altruistic giving or volunteering. And we think about students. The engagement of students is largely driven by their well-being. In fact, their career well-being, how they occupy their time, is probably largely overlapped with their student engagement. How involved with and enthusiastic are they about their school or their work. So it causes us to wonder, how much do people really care on college campuses about well-being, just in general? And this is a question we asked on a Illumina poll a couple of years ago. So the question was actually worded, this is a public opinion poll. Colleges and universities in this country care deeply about the students' overall well-being. That's the statement. And then we gave them a 1 to 5 where 5's high. And really, there's not much of a pattern to the data. If you can't see it in Kirksville there's 13% that strongly disagreed, 35% that are neutral, 9% that strongly disagree. I mean, it's a pretty normal bell curve when you look at the respondents from 1,000 random Americans about, do you believe that colleges and universities care about students' well-being? I don't know what a good score is, but I don't think that's it. I'm not sure this reflects reality either. This is public opinion, and as we find on a lot of topics, public opinion doesn't always reflect reality. It's their perception, but as go voters and policies and things like that, perception matters a lot. So if we're doing a better job as higher ed institutions about caring about students' well-being, we're not doing a good enough job educating the public about it. So if any of you work in admissions or fundraising or something like that, it might be helpful to get the word out a little bit about how much you care about the students' overall well-being. Because apparently, and this is across all types of institutions and all around the country, but apparently, in general, citizens don't believe higher ed is committed enough or is very committed to students' overall well-being. So a couple other tidbits from our research before we get into your data. So we do a nightly tracking poll where every night we call a random 1,000 people around the country and ask them a broad range of questions, because we're Gallup and we can do that. It's fun to be a researcher there because I've always got plenty of sample to analyze. So we study, 360 nights a year. We take a couple of holidays off and a couple of days just in case we need to close the interviewing center for a night or something. But anyway, we find a broad range of well-being across the states. Utah is very high in well-being. Colorado is very high. There's a few other, every state on the list obviously, but Mississippi and West Virginia I think was the lowest this year when we studied well-being overall. But then we look at it even down to the city level. So Michigan is one of the worst cities, or one of the worst states in terms of their overall well-being, just in the 50 state rankings. But Ann Arbor, Michigan is one of the highest MSAs, Metropolitan Service Areas. So there's something about Ann Arbor, maybe it's Zingerman's restaurant, for any of you who've been to Ann Arbor, you know about Zingerman's. I don't know what it is. There's something about that community that's different than the state that it's a part of. And we see that with other college towns. Austin, Texas has much higher well-being than the state of Texas overall. Lawrence, Kansas has a big, kind of, we have a Jayhawk here? Okay. Oh, a Longhorn, okay. I'm not even gonna go there because I'm gonna get in trouble with somebody no matter what I say. So yeah, there's something about college towns that tends to have higher well-being than the states or the other cities in the area. And I suspect there's a lot of things about that. One of the things we see when you're in a college town, let's say you're in Kirksville, or you're looking at another city the size of Kirksville around the country. If you're in Kirksville, you've got KCOM, you've got Truman State. Most people in town are either on the payroll for one of the institutions, they're a student at one of the institutions, they're married to or living with someone who's at one of those institutions, or at least they know a bunch of people who are. So as go those institutions, kind of so goes the community. And a lot of the, not just the career well-being, but there's probably more opportunities for social interaction. There's more of a community feel in a place like that because you kind of know your neighbors, you work with them. Sidney, Nebraska is similar to that. Cabela's is located in Sidney, Nebraska. There's 8,000 people in Sidney, but like 7,000 of them work at Cabela's. So it really is an old company town like you read about from decades gone by. But so there's something about those colleges and university towns. Probably lots of people named Dan in these towns that like trails. I know there's a Dan in that town that likes trails and figures out ways to connect different parts of the city together so that there's more access for people who like to go on 50-mile bike rides before breakfast or whatever. That kind of energy happens in college towns more so than others. So that's a good thing. And also the last is access to basic necessities. Some of this is like housing. If you think of a traditional institution where students are 18, 19, 20 years old, coming to town, looking for a cheap apartment to live in. Well, maybe as a landlord you would target a student population, but probably you have lots of other people around town who are also looking for affordable housing options. So that's another benefit of being in a college town. All of that to say, at Gallup we started to think, what about this well-being science and how it might look on in a college community? So that's what gave us the impetus to launch this Campus Wellbeing Consortium. We really had a vision to create a discussion about well-being for the people who learn and work at colleges and universities. That's pretty broad. We had all kinds of institutions in mind when we launched this project. So I was pleased to see the application from AT Still because I hadn't thought as much about specialized type of universities or graduate schools or professional programs as the traditional kind of on campus, brick and mortar, private, public, that kind of thing. So we were pleased to kind of broaden our own thinking about that when you all came and expressed some interest in this. There's 3 things we really focused on with the Campus Wellbeing Consortium. One is creating a vocabulary about what's right with students and staff and faculty. The second was to develop and track metrics, to put some math to it and get some edges around what's really happening here and why do we care. And then to use existing resources to make life better on campus. Our job at Gallup wasn't to parachute in, come up with 1,000 things you need to do and programs you need to launch and ways you need to redesign your campus and critique everything on your menus and what's in your vending machines. I mean, there might be some information out there that's helpful to have about that, but it's not like you weren't thinking about wellness or well-being before you heard of Gallup or 3 or 4 years ago, and it's not like you won't be still thinking about it and working on it into the future. So our job was to try and come in, help create more of a conversation, put some metrics around it, and maybe make some suggestions about programming or things that are happening, and also to shine a light on what's already happening. I mean, you're still healthy and still well, and different things. I think Ron Gaber was mayor of Kirksville, or ought to have been for a while there. I mean, some of the things that happen in that community, largely based on the efforts of the different teams that you have on your campuses. So we didn't invent this science, we just tried to study it, put some edges around it, and share some ideas around it, and hopefully been able to do that over the last couple of years. So when we think about the research that we were focused on, there's 2 main areas. One is correlational studies. I was curious, all of us at Gallup were curious about the relationship between debt load and financial well-being, or the relationship between, how does it look if you live on campus or don't live on campus. That's not as relevant maybe here since you're on dorms on campus, but at University of North Texas or TCU, if you live on campus, what's that say about your social well-being or community well-being that might be different? How about card swipes at the rec center or the YMCA, and how does that affect your physical well-being? Strangely enough, when we look at this globally, the cultures who have the highest well-being are the ones who have the lowest incidence of gym membership. The problem here in this country and other cultures like ours is we think working out for 30 minutes every morning checks off the box about physical well-being, and then we park as close to the building as we can, and we drive 3 blocks to the next store, and we don't do any physical well-being the rest of the day because we've kind of checked, we've already broke a sweat once today. In other cultures, you see where they walk 3 miles to the grocery store. And in the evenings, they get together with their neighbors and walk. Loma Linda, California is one of the best examples of well-being. And they get together and go on these neighborhood walks and are real involved in things like that. And just kind of the way that we think about well-being in this culture tends to be more compartmentalized than in some cultures where they tend to have a less disease burden and less kind of issues related to health and things. So we were interested in the correlational studies. Also, we're interested in longitudinal studies. What's the well-being of a typical first-year medical student? What happens from the first year to the second year, from the second year to the third year, and so on? We don't really know. We haven't been able to kind of crack the code on that, but we were interested when we launched into this to say, let's all take a long-term approach about this. We've got correlational studies from other projects we've done. We'd really like to study, if you think about a freshman or a first-year student coming in, what's their well-being each year? And then what about their first year when they're out in the field, whether that's in a residency or go to grad school or go to the work world? What might that look like over time, and really study that trend? So one of my biggest regrets about the fact that consortium's coming to a close is that we never were able to really crack the code on that. We've got some evidence about what happens from first year to second year students and with employees and things as well, but really interested in studying that over time. And then I mentioned a couple of these, but debt load or age. If you're mid-career, does that make a difference related to your well-being as a student? And if you've never had a full-time job before, I know many of your students, if not most, have had other careers prior to their time with your institution. So would that make a difference? And then again, what level do you engage with the community, and how do you define community, particularly as a student? For employees, it may be more stable or more similar to other organizations where you live in this community, you get a job at the institution, and you kind of keep doing what you've been doing. But for students where you kind of, in many cases, most cases, pick up and move and maybe don't, how many doctors does this, Gilbert or Mesa need? You probably graduate more than there are openings, in this local community. You're seeing people all around the country, all around the world. So many of them might see this as just a 2 or 3 or 5 year kind of just passing through. So those are some of the questions we had coming in. So ATSU is one of the 3 institutions that was chosen 2 or 3 years ago when we started this. Texas Christian University and the University of North Texas being the others. Both primarily 4-year, both have graduate programs as well, but TCU and Fort Worth being much smaller, private, more expensive, so on. University of North Texas in Denton, and I know there's some UNT connections here. I think they have a deal program there, and maybe there's some faculty who've gone back and forth between the two over time. But the University of North Texas has a lot of students living on campus. It's a state school, land-grant school, so they're different kind of a situation there. At ATSU specifically, you were all invited as faculty and staff, and all of your first-year students across your programs were invited to participate as well. So that was another thing that was nice about the size and scope of the project here. We were able to go more broad, where at UNT, where they've got 40,000 students, 15 or 20,000 employees, depending on whether you count full-time, part-time, and all that, it was more difficult to go a census there. But here we were able to extend it and really make it more of a campus opportunity. And then we also want to really think about not just the data, although that's what I dream in syntax and think about data a lot. We really wanted to think about the programming that happens as a result. Not just the fact that we collect the data, we've got some numbers, but did any positive change happen as a result? Not just at the individual level, although that's probably what's most important, but at the group level. Let's say PT students have a different kind of a context than OT students do, or than the PA students, or in Kirksville it might be different than here, or whatever the case might be. So at the local level, what kind of action planning can you do to create a context for well-being to really flourish? So that was another piece that we were after there. Just a real quick review of the timelines here. In 2010, in the fall, we dreamt up this idea, came up with the application process, did the site visits, and selected the 3 institutions. In the spring, we met in Omaha, Nebraska at Gallup's operations headquarters, met with many of our top researchers there, and brought together kind of some ideas about where do we want this to go and set up our research agenda. Each institution has its own IRB and has its own expectations and that, but there were some common things that really kind of spanned all 3 institutions and gave us an opportunity to learn from each other in that. By the way, Kurt and his team were more easy to work with than particularly at one of the institutions, but maybe at both, so thank you for that. You all engage in research on a regular basis, but so do the other institutions, and we had more hurdles around IRB than, it's a 4-letter word on some campuses. But anyway, in the fall, we actually started data collection. We did a rollout on this campus and in Kirksville as well, where we spoke to many different groups of students and faculty and staff throughout those times. I'm sure many of the hands in the room here were a part of one of those sessions back in the fall. We also met in DC in conjunction with the Gallup WellBeing Forum, so our project team, about a dozen or so from across the different institutions, were able to come together and learn from each other. We did data collection again in the spring of 2012 and started some different programming opportunities, and then in the fall also did another round of data collection and programming. Now, any of you who have participated in the WellBeing Finder, you still have access to that, and really through, I think it's March 11th, I'll mention for sure, but you still have access. So if you're curious about what your well-being is today, you can still log in and take the assessment up until mid-March there. So I'd encourage you to do that. It's not only available when we send you an email reminder about it, but from a research perspective, we wanted to study a snapshot in time, a 2 or 3 week kind of slice of time. In certain parts of the country, there's big swings in well-being across seasons and that kind of thing. And on campus, I suspect there's probably, based on whether we're at the start or the end of the term, things feel a little different on campus, and that probably spills over to how we evaluate our own well-being as well. So we really want to look at it at a point in time, but you have access ongoing to the site throughout up until mid-March. So here's a couple of pieces of data, takeaways we had as we looked at the ATSU specific data. And for those of you at Kirksville, if you're not able to see the slides, I'll make those available, and you can take a look at this. But I'll just share a couple of highlights here. So there's two colors of bars that will pop up here. The dark colored bar, the one you see right now, was ATSU overall. Across the 3 main administrations, we had a couple of pockets of groups in between, but fall of 2011, we had 621 participants across the campuses. In spring of 2012, there were 475, some of which also participated in fall of 11. So these are not all unique but the number of responses in each of those field periods. And then fall of 2012, there were 656. Not big differences in terms of the raw score from 2011 through fall of 2012. There was a slight increase, a couple of point increase, which statistically might be a big difference when you look at 500 or so respondents. But there were different groups who chose to participate in each of those. One of the groups included some online students and that. So I don't want to get too hung up in terms of comparison across time, but there is a slight increase, and I'll explain in a moment, but I think a lot of that was due to people who took the assessment more than once. They tended to have a little increase in their well-being if they participated on an ongoing basis. Here's the national data. 64.5 is the national average. So in each of the 3 field periods, ATSU students, faculty, and staff combined showed up higher than the typical U.S. working population. There may be, lots of explanations about that, but it's not real helpful to see that you're a 65 or a 68 without knowing what a good score or an average score is. So you're at least at the national average, if not a little above. Some programs may have been a bit below. Some were certainly, most were probably above, and when we cut the data, but in general, you were at or above the national average in terms of your raw well-being score. So let's cut it a different way. When we take the 3 administrations and combine them together, since there's not major differences across administrations, and we look at each of the 5 elements of well-being: career, social, financial, physical, community. I'll show you the faculty, staff, and the student breakout, ATSU overall, and then there's a black bar for the U.S. working population. On career well-being, I was a bit surprised to see that students' career well-being is actually higher than employees' career well-being. Some of you might not be surprised about that. Dr. Sexton recommended in an earlier conversation that this might be because all the students are first-year students. They were just chosen to be a part of something important that they really want to be a part of. It was competitive. So they're coming in at a pretty high point. And really, in many of these data points are first-year students. Some were second-year students in the fall of 2012 sample, but many of them were students who were just coming into the institution, so they started a pretty high spot. It gives a little more evidence that career well-being is not just for employees, but students can evaluate that and seem to score well. So that's a pretty big difference there. Across the other elements, we don't see as big a differences. Social well-being, students came out just a touch higher than faculty, staff. On financial well-being, they were really about the same across the 3, which caused me to really want to explore that more. And I know in some focus groups and smaller discussions on campus, financial well-being's gotten a lot of attention. Again, when is it my money? When are the loans really real? Maybe I don't have a great income today, but I believe things are coming that I'm making an investment for the future, and that feels good. Maybe being on a shoestring budget as a college student helps you to manage things more tightly and have a more intentional relationship with money, rather than if you have enough money to buy things you need and you don't pay attention to it, at the end of the month you wonder where it all went. So there may be, I don't know, those are all possible explanations about that, but that tended to be more consistent. Physical well-being students, again, were just a touch higher than faculty, staff, but about the same on that one as well. And then on community well-being, they flipped. On community well-being, the faculty, staff actually scored higher than the students did in our sample. And again, I'd be interested in some ideas about this, but it may be something to do with that just passing through mentality, or I don't really completely feel at home because I'm not here to get involved in the community or to have a home that is perfect for me right now, or that kind of thing. I'm really here for my education. So I don't know, especially in this type of an institution where most people are from outside the communities and most people will leave the communities after graduation, their perspective about the importance of community well-being might be a bit different there as I did. So one thing I want to mention on community well-being, there's 4 elements or 4 components about that. One is about safety. So do you feel safe in the area or place where you live, or if you lost your wallet, would you feel like it would be returned with its contents intact, or that kind of thing. So that's safety. Pride is another one. Are you proud of the place where you live? Can you imagine a community better than the one you're in right now? That sort of thing. So more like, how do I evaluate Mesa or Gilbert or Phoenix or Kirksville or whatever you kind of identify as home in that place. The third is the home or the place where you live. So thinking more about the physical space you have. There were some questions about the area or place where I live is perfect for me or for me and my family. There's questions about the actual space that you have and is that appropriate for where you're at right now. It doesn't ever ask how many square feet are in your home. There's people who live in a 600 square foot studio who probably feel like that's the perfect amount of space because they don't have to deal with a lot, clean a lot, whatever, manage a lot of situations. They just don't want a lot of stuff. And other people have huge places and feel like it's not appropriate for them. So it's not about the raw data, but it's about your perception of fit with that space. And then the fourth element is really around your involvement in your community. And we think about community well-being in the media or things. We're often thinking about, did you volunteer at your church or with Habitat for Humanity or at the animal shelter or whatever your thing is. That's important, but as we measure it here, it's only one of the four pieces about community. So it's not just community involvement like getting active on campus kind of thing, but it's more broad evaluation of how the area of the community fits who I am. So those are some of your data there. One other slice of your data that was interesting to us as we started to dive into this, does measurement improve performance? So is it possible that just taking the assessment and heightening your awareness about well-being could serve as kind of a micro-intervention that might cause you to grow in your well-being a little bit? We found some initial evidence that suggests there may be some of that going on. So I'm going to show you three different groups here. The first group is ATSU overall. So looking at fall 2011, fall 2012, overall the change was barely existent at all. I mean, you grew a touch there, but that almost is rounding error. I mean, from 65.3 to 65.4. So it's not like 2012 was a lot better year than 2011 based on anything that we discovered in our data here. And we don't tend to see major swings in national data either. We think about how financially the country's in a terrible place right now. Well, the Dow started at 14,000 points today. So I mean, it's not terrible for everybody all the time. There's local stress and strain. I know the housing market here was hit pretty hard. Unemployment in some places is still double digits where, in Omaha, unemployment might be 2.9 or 3.1% or something, which is borderline too low. I mean, you want to have a little bit of unemployment to keep people on their toes and keep people coming in and that kind of thing. So anyway, overall there wasn't a big difference here. But when we look at the 264 people who took the assessment both in the fall last year, or in 11 and fall of 12, you actually do start to see a decent jump there. About 4-point jump there from fall of 2011 to fall of 2012. And they started at almost exactly the same spot. And they were 65.3 and 65.4. So basically they were the same raw score coming in, but those who chose to participate later bounced up a little bit. So again, looking at average scores only one way to see it, but there appears to be something about those people who chose to come back and take the assessment again that's a positive thing. For the people who took it all 3 times, it's essentially the same slope, just they started a little bit higher, they finished a little bit higher, but so taking it every day doesn't necessarily, I mean, some of you are thinking, I know how I'm going to improve my well-being, I'm going to take the well-being finder every morning before breakfast. Well, I'm not sure, there's probably a point of diminishing returns, but at least to take it quarterly, annually, in this case, if you took it 3 times over an 18-month period, there appeared to be a positive relationship there. Now again, it's possible that only the people who knew they'd score well came back to the assessment. And if you were having a bad day or having a bad year or whatever, you didn't want to come back. Well, when we look at the actual numbers of individual by individual, those who took it twice, so fall of 11 and fall of 12, 175 of them increased their score, 4 of them stayed the same, and 85 of them decreased. So it's about 2-to-1 ratio of those who grew versus those who declined. So it doesn't mean if you took it again, everybody got better. On average, the score went up, and you had a 2-to-1 ratio, better odds than not if you came back and took it. But there were a fair amount of people who came back and had a lower score than in their first kind of baseline administration. And if you took it 3 times, while the slope, again, in the line's about the same, the number of people who grew versus those who decreased was actually a little better ratio. 132 increased, 4 stayed the same, and 59 decreased. So lots of different ways to slice and dice the data, and this afternoon we'll have a conversation about other kind of nuggets that we might be able to unearth here. But a couple of pieces of initial evidence, at least, that suggest paying attention to your well-being is a good thing. That was a profound statement, wasn't it? But why don't we do it? And that's some of the feedback we get is, well, this is so simple and basic, and what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is we know it, but we don't do it, right? I mean, we're not intentional enough about managing our own well-being across those 5 elements as we might be. And there's real good evidence that shows that we should be. So our goal is to take a complicated topic and try and break it into simple pieces, and then figure out ways for people to just make one better choice. Like, don't eat a salad today because it's going to make you lose weight. Eat a salad today because it'll make you feel better today. Or don't work out today because you've got some big goal for 6 months from now. Work out today because you'll feel better throughout the rest of today. We need to kind of figure out ways to make those choices more in the moment rather than overall. So let me wrap up our time here, and then we'll take questions if you have them. Let me wrap up with just a few takeaways here, or challenges that we had, lessons learned as we think about the last couple of years here. As you know, I think from emails and stuff, the consortium is wrapping up activities this spring. I'm disappointed about that. I think there's people in this room who've invested a lot in this, and we're sad to see, just a 2-year project, although that's a longer project than some, but our intention was to have it be a 5-year or more project. The University of North Texas ended up actually requesting to remove themselves from the project, and they were actually bigger in terms of participation rate or in terms of intended participation than ATSU and TCU combined. Now, unfortunately, the biggest reason for their wanting to pull out is because they only had 9% participation rate. They invited every student who lived in their residence halls to participate in this, and then all of the student advisors and RAs and everybody who surrounds those students, and got less than 10% of them to respond. And they did all kinds of things to try and boost participation rate. And they just were, they decided to focus some resources and time and things in other directions. But when you take the biggest project, the biggest institution out of one where there's only 3, then it kind of changes the dynamics of the consortium. So some things we've taken away. One is that building awareness and participation rates is hard, as I just evidenced at AUNT. The team here, Bernadette and Janet and Trish and Erlinda and many of the rest of you, Kurt and others, put a lot of effort into it, were very intentional about it, and had somewhere around 40 or 50% participation rate, which as surveys go on a college campus, that's not bad. If you do a benefits survey or a work culture survey or something like that, to get 50% return doesn't feel terrible. We're used to higher response rates in that when we work with students, because most of our work with students is around the StrengthsFinder assessment, and it tends to be almost 100% participation. But it's usually tied to a class or tied to it's an expectation more than an option. And if you throw something out there and make it optional, no matter how cool it sounds, people get busy and just choose not to participate. So we didn't have very many people, like a couple handfuls total, who actually intentionally said, please remove me from this list. Or please don't remind me to do the survey, I want to opt out. Most people were just passive about it if they chose not to participate. Technology was an issue that we hadn't anticipated as much. I'm apparently getting old and still use email, and apparently that's not true. I'm seeing nods and smiles. You must have students at this institution who complain about not checking their email or something too. But in this case, we were really only asking them to log on to a website, check their email, get their password, log on to the website for 20 minutes, take a survey, 6 months later do it again, 6 months later do it again. Not a huge time commitment or technology need, but the amount of people who say, well, if you had an app, I'd do it. I mean, it takes more time to create an app than it would be worth, but if that's a barrier, real or perceived, then that's something we didn't anticipate, that probably, especially with the traditional undergrad audiences, may have impacted our participation rates. The daily tracker, which some of you participate in as well, on that I definitely could see the need for an app, so you don't have to go to a website, log in, all that kind of stuff. But that was something we didn't anticipate that we certainly learned about. Group level reporting and action planning. We're kind of just getting started with this right now, so it's unfortunate we're wrapping up the data collection phase. At the same time, we're starting to do something with the numbers, but you still can measure well-being, and you can still manage to it and have discussions at the local level, which is really where the change occurs. There's a lot of variance across groups within the institution. So the data I just shared are broad but not as actionable as the ones that are closer to the action. The team that you are a part of, you and your manager and your coworkers, that kind of thing, probably have more to do with your local work environment, or the same with students. The program that you might serve there, the DO program probably has a unique kind of a culture and well-being relationship with the institution than other programs might. So again, we want to move from measurement to intervention, really focus on improving well-being. Another tricky part that we didn't anticipate would be a roadblock as much. There's a confidentiality agreement, or at least you're anonymous. I guess confidential would mean we wouldn't be able to identify you. We could because you logged in with your email, but we never shared individual level results back with the institution, which made it difficult to intervene at an individual level because you can't know what someone's score was. So even if you want to be a resource and you want to help and you want to be a good colleague or a good instructor or something, it was up to the individual to choose if they wanted to share that information. And most probably didn't. We didn't ask them to ever, but so that makes it more difficult to intervene. It's not like a patient who might show up in your clinic where you've got all kinds of information about them specifically. Here, we were kind of at arm's length relationship with the individual level data. And then we want to continue to study, some of those questions I posed earlier. So what? What relationship does this have to measures that matter on campus? When well-being goes up within a particular group, why? What did they do differently? What happened there? And so on. And then the last thing is just where do we go from here? We didn't invent the science of well-being. We didn't introduce it to you for the first time. You had Still Well and Wellness Week and Still Healthy and other initiatives long before you had Gallup as a part of your campus activity. So clearly, just because the consortium is wrapping up activities doesn't mean that you all stop your focus on well-being. Hopefully there's some lessons learned that can even accelerate that. We've got a conversation this afternoon with some academic champions and have had student affairs and HR and others involved in these conversations all along. Hopefully we'll be able to continue that and really expand offerings on your campus and use this as kind of a boost to be able to borrow from this model or that kind of thing. I mentioned the academic champions. Specifically, I want to call out the Gallup Online site closes on March 11th as the contract wraps up and that kind of thing. So if you took the Wellbeing Finder individually and you want to download your results, you can save a PDF file or print it out or whatever. I'd encourage you to do that today or the next couple of days here, certainly before March 11th. And again, if you want to retake the assessment, we're not going to do a formal fielding period in the spring, but if you're interested, anytime in the next 2 or 3 weeks here, or month, whatever, log in and take the Wellbeing Finder for yourself. If you're interested beyond March 11th, there's the Wellbeing book that I mentioned has a Wellbeing Finder code on the inside cover. For $14, you can buy a copy of the book, and with that comes a 6-month access to the site. So if you're interested in continuing beyond, I know there's a few classes that use the Wellbeing book currently, and that's still certainly available as you move forward. So I'm going to wrap up there. I take questions if you have anything or discussion or Bernadette or anybody, anything I left out that this group might be interested in knowing about. I know I didn't cover everything, but if you have other questions, I think you know who your point of contact folks are here with the program. Remember March 11th as your date. You need to go in and download it. If you want to take it again between now and then, you're sure welcome to do that. Are there questions from Kirksville, and how would they get them to us if they do? Is the audio on there? Or? Okay. Or email them to Tanya, not Watson. Bitch? Yes? Yeah. Cool. Well, if you have other questions, please let your team know, and they know how to get a hold of me, or you can contact me directly, tim_hodges@gallup.com is my email address. We'll be glad to continue the conversation if there's thoughts as you move forward. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.